The last component of critical thinking is also creative. Here you get to think of a way to test your proposed alternative explanation. Basically, what you should do is propose a study that could be conducted that would allow you to rule out your alternative explanation. You will want to start with at least 2 equal groups, implement your predictor variable while holding everything else constant, and then measure your outcome. And we'll call this a randomized and controlled experiment. Be sure to link this section directly with your proposed alternative explanation. If your alternative explanation had to do with the groups not being equal at the start, then you need to specify how you are going to create groups that are equal, or at least equivalent. In social sciences, we often do this by randomly assigning the participants to different treatment conditions. Random assignment should create groups that are equivalent on all the pre-existing differences. For example, the levels of the variable gender should be about equal in each group. The levels of the variable intelligence should be about equal in each group. The level of the variable desire to improve sense of taste should be about equal in each group. By using random assignment, we can assume that there are no systematic differences between the groups at the beginning. If we still found a difference in the outcome, we could rule out any alternative explanations that suggested there were pre-existing differences. Another way to create equal groups is to have each participant experience all the different levels of the predictor variable. This way, you are comparing each person to themselves, so you really have created equal groups. This is only viable, though, if the different levels of a variable don't have a lasting effect, or if participating in one level wouldn't interfere with participating in another level. If your alternative explanation had to do with the groups being treated differently, then you would want to specify how you are going to ensure that your groups have the same experiences with the exception of the level of the predictor variable. This might include creating a placebo control group where the control group is given something that looks and feels just like the experimental group, but is missing the active ingredient. In our taste-o-matic example, we would want to create a control group who were also given something called a taste-o-matic, along with all the instructions and recipes, and who were asked to use it in exactly the same way for the same length of time as the experimental group. The only difference being that this taste-o-matic was not actually active. If we still found a difference in the outcome, we could rule out any alternative explanations that relied on the groups having different experiences. If your alternative explanation had to do with the outcome and the predictor being reversed, then you would want to see if you could switch them around. For some things, like testing if ecstasy puts holes in people's brains, it would be unethical to conduct the experiment to test that claim. Well, that wouldn't be a problem if you were the supreme dictator of the world. You're not, so it's a problem. If you propose an unethical test of an alternative explanation, that means you haven't really proposed a good way of testing your alternative explanation, since no one in the world would let you actually run the study. It's important for you to make sure your proposed study is ethical. If not, you're probably going to get some points knocked off. So what do you do in cases where you can't design a randomized, controlled experiment? Well, there are a few different options available to you. In general, this will involve gathering additional data after the fact from your participants, or gathering data from a much wider group of people than just those who have experienced the proposed cause, such as ecstasy. For example, if you think that social economic status, SES, is a third variable explanation for some claim, though you can't effectively randomly assign people to different SES groups, you can ask everyone to report their SES and see if that, on its own, correlates with the outcome measure. If it doesn't, then you can rule out that alternate explanation. Sometimes, it is just a matter of making sure you have a comparison group. For example, to test the relationship between ecstasy and holes in the brain, you could start by enrolling a few thousand young teenagers into the study with the assumption that over the next few years, some of them will choose to use ecstasy. You can measure how many holes they have in their brains at the beginning, wait a long enough period of time, measure the holes again, and ask them about their ecstasy use. This lets the people who use ecstasy self-enroll into the ecstasy group, but also gives you a good comparison group. You'll learn much more about the details of designing a good experiment in the part of this class on experiments. So don't worry, we won't penalize you on details that you haven't learned yet. To earn maximum points, be sure that you follow the basics of running an experiment and make sure you tell us how this will address the alternative explanation you proposed. So, step 1. Start with at least 2 groups. That way you can make a comparison. Step 2. Ensure that those groups are equivalent. That way you can rule out pre-existing differences. Step 3. Treat the groups in the same way. That way you can rule out differences in treatment. And finally, step 4. Measure and compare the outcome.